Andor is different. It's not like any of the other Star Wars TV shows. But is that difference a good thing? I believe it is, and by the end of this video, I think you're gonna believe it too. When Andor was released in 2022, it broke the mold of traditional Star Wars TV storytelling by offering a more grounded and politically charged narrative, especially when compared to shows like Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Everything is a bit gray, not a binary black and white. In fact, this is the very thing that made the original trilogy and the prequels stand out and be so fantastic. It was these characters who were caught in these impossible situations, who made very challenging decisions. And all of this seems to be missing among the Disney era shows. But even when it is tried, it kind of falls completely on its face.
Attack me with all your strength.
The critical acclaim and audience engagement show a deep desire from Star Wars fans for more complex narratives in the Star Wars universe, even though this is a bit of a departure from the more action-heavy perspective. And so, it's this rise of Andor that must be studied more deeply, especially if we want more things like this in the Star Wars universe. We must be much clearer on what makes Andor great. Andor could be described as a political thriller. And while this is somewhat a departure from the space opera theme that Star Wars usually is, I actually think it fits better than people give it credit for. I believe this is the very thing needed coming off of a prequel trilogy written by George Lucas, where politics were front and center in much of what was going on all throughout those films.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
And so in this, we're seeing a different perspective, how the rebellion is coming together, how it can be politically charged, how everything going on in the Empire is a breeding ground of sorts for rebellion. Andor offers a grounded perspective on rebellion, exploring the true cost of fighting for freedom by portraying the struggle of everyday ordinary people. The political intrigue in Andor adds a layer of depth to the Star Wars universe that just makes it even more immersive than ever before. We're drawn into these emotional struggles of these ordinary people as they're pulled into conflict because of the oppression that they see. And in the flip side of that, we're seeing the Empire grow fat and lazy, thinking they can do whatever they want because the people are just going to roll over and let them do it. And at the end of the day, this helps answer the question how a small group of individuals could come together to form a rebellion that would overthrow the Empire. Flawed, relatable, and driven by realistic motivations, these are the characters we meet in Andor. I could go on and on about how it's the supporting cast around Cassian that makes this show so different and so good, but we don't have much time for that. This show avoids the archetypal characters and usual tropes that we see in Star Wars. It's what made some kind of frustrated at the sequel trilogy, feeling like it was just a rehash of the original trilogy. Whereas Andor is taking these characters, giving them real motivations, real reasons for doing what they do. Each one is a complex puzzle all in their own right. Some of them only even appear for an episode or two, but we're drawn into their story because of the depth and complexity. This is the exact same thing that George Lucas and Irv Kershner did in The Empire Strikes Back, the sequel to Star Wars A New Hope, where we got character motivations and the storytelling for characters like Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Leia, Han, everyone, And it's in that film, that second film, where it gets dark, it gets gritty. We start to see all of these different things play out. And it's the difference that took Star Wars and those characters from just being cool sci-fi characters to being the legends and icons they are today. Now, I'm not saying that Andor is going to make Cassian Andor an icon and a legend, but what I am saying is the approach to storytelling and the approach to these characters with this depth and complexity that we see in Andor is very much what made Star Wars great. Andor was just built different. The storytelling structure of setup, confrontation, and resolution is all throughout the show. Now, that isn't very different than most stories, but the way that Andor approaches structuring its story makes this narrative arc so absolutely clear, and it helps the viewer get immersed into what's happening. Let me explain. In 12 episodes, we're getting these 3 to 4 episode arcs at different places of all of this going on. So when you go to season 1 of Andor, our first 3 episodes are really introducing these characters, setting up this tension of what's happened with Andor now being the one who's a fugitive, and it all culminates in him escaping. The payoff is him escaping with Luthen. And then we get the Aldhani heist as the next setup, confrontation, resolution, all in that next 3 episodes. Then we get a 4 episode arc with Narkina 5 that really actually is setting up something that's 5 episodes away when we get to the funeral, because there's all these puzzle pieces being moved, but it's through that Narkina 5 prison break that we get that 4 episode arc of setup, confrontation, resolution, and then we come to the very final 2 episodes where everything that was set up all throughout the show comes to a final resolution and a final payoff. So these mini arcs, along with this large arc, are an absolute perfect way that this story is being told. And it pulls the viewer in. There's always something to get hooked on. There's always a payoff right around the corner. The problem is some people don't like the setup or the confrontation. They just want the payoff. But that's why Andor is built different. It's built to give you satisfying resolutions. Unlike many of the other Star Wars shows where they build something up and the resolution that comes just is kinda lame. But even more amazing than that, let me give you an example of the way that Andor tells all of these different stories in a parallel fashion, moving them all to that final point. So when we get that Narkina 5 story arc where Cassian is breaking out of prison, at that same time, Mon Mothma is trapped at Coruscant, stuck in what she is feeling like is closing in on her like a prison. Bix is being tortured like in a prison. We're getting pictures of Marva in her own body, trapped as she's trying to deal with the failing health that she has. Then we even have Cyril Karn in his own little prison, stuck in this middle management cubicle setting. All of those stories start to mirror and parallel along one another, and as we're jumping from arc to arc in these different characters' journeys, it's one seamless told story. So in a way, the genius of the storytelling of Andor comes in the structure and the planning. It's not just Tony Gilroy jumping onto a page and writing everything he thinks is great. There's an actual plan. Again, something that never existed when it came to the sequel trilogy, and part of the main reason that whole trilogy completely falls apart, particularly when you look at the narrative writing choices compared to a show like Andor. You already know it. I've proved it to you. Andor is different, and I think I've given you some of the reasons that it clearly is different than a lot of other Star Wars, but for the better. We get this political thriller from the ground up, these grassroots beginning of the rebellion with these characters that are complex, that they are deep and emotional, where the storytelling is structured in such a way that we're drawn into it with the setup, confrontation, and resolution all tied together in such a way that we're moving from episode to episode, and we can't wait to see what happens with each of these characters. And it all culminates in a giant final episode with a massive payoff. So what do I expect from season 2 of Andor? Well, I'm trying not to expect way too much, but I'm going to expect all of these same things. And as I said earlier, this is more like the brilliance of The Empire Strikes Back. And many folks will agree that that's the best of all the Star Wars movies. So when we're talking about we want things like Andor, when you hear Star Wars fans like myself saying we want more shows and more writing like Andor, what we're not saying is we want things that don't feel or look like Star Wars. In fact, I'm saying exactly the opposite. What Andor does is the most Star Wars can be, because it's about the storytelling, it's about the actions of these characters, and it's showing the heart motivations and building these relationships, just like we got in the original trilogy with Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and so on. We need more shows like Andor. We need more movies like Andor in the Star Wars universe. So Disney, if you're listening, maybe, just maybe, rewind the video, take some notes, and go do it.